What I would like to do at this point is delve a little bit deeper into the book itself, where we find on page 49, in this spiritual war, there's a creed that says, if freedom is ever to be realized, those freedom fighters who dare to challenge a powerful enemy must be equipped with the divine skill and understanding. Skill to know how to confront such an enemy, the understanding to know when and where, and the blessings of Yah Almighty to undertake the task divinely. The power to define, which is the ability to discern and the will to interpret and implement ideas and philosophies in order to be totally victorious in battle against one's enemy. This is the essentiality of spiritual warfare. Those who would be champions of the battle must comprehend spiritual warfare and be prepared to face it and overcome any obstacles. So what does this term even mean when you hear this concept of spiritual warfare? What is spirit? Like, when we deal with definitions, we're dealing with language, and language is an extension in many respects of how people think. So different cultures may define certain words in different ways. And when you study the language of the culture, you get more insight into their definitions. So when we go into the Hebrew scriptures and we want to understand the Hebrew concept of spirit, we see that it's actually pronounced ruach. And you can say it at home in your own time, ruach. That's spelled R-U-A-K-H. That last part that is a het in Hebrew, right? And so ruach, it's not ru'ah, it's not ru'ah, right? You got to practice these Hebrew pronunciations. Ruach. And ruach is the word in Hebrew that is translated into English as spirit. But what does ruach mean? The term itself, it literally means wind. Wind, like the wind that blows, And why is the word for spirit related to the word for wind? Well, because they're very similar. In Hebrew thought, terms have concrete meanings, so the definitions of words often relate to something that you could experience with your senses. So you wouldn't necessarily find a word like being, like these abstract words that don't really have a core concept, like a otherworldly ghost figure, like those wouldn't be the terms that are used. Ruach as wind, however, makes perfect sense because you can understand how the wind works because you experience wind. You know what wind is like. You know that you can't see wind with your eyes, but you can know when it's there. And how do you know when wind is there? By its effects. So wind is invisible, but you can see wind when you look at its impact on its environment. You can see wind when it touches and causes something to move in a specific way. As a matter of fact, if you look close enough and if you pay attention, you'd actually be able to realize what kind of wind you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a strong wind or a weak wind, a high wind or a low wind? You might look up and you see the top of the trees are moving, but the leaves on the ground are not moving, or vice versa. And so by looking at the wind, or you see a tornado lifting houses up into the air, you can see the wind by its effects. And it's the same thing with spirit. Spirit is invisible. You don't see spirit, but you can see its effects on its environment. You can see its effects on people. You can see when somebody, for example, you might hear somebody say like, there's something wrong with his spirit, but you don't see his spirit. What do you see? You see the effects on his face, body language, the energy they give off, the way they respond and react to things, the spirit of anger, the spirit of depression, the spirit of violence, the spirit of lust, the spirit of greed. These are invisible. You don't see them, right? But you see their effects, just like wind. And so another way that we could think about what spirit is that spirit is, if you want to translate it into a modern idea, spirit is an invisible influence that produces visible results. I want you to think about that for a moment. When you're thinking about spirit, think about an invisible influence that produces visible results. So in the same sense that you don't see the wind blowing, literally, but you can see that person's hat fly off of their head, You don't see a spirit moving, but you can see the impact on people's lives. So spirit is influence. So we as people, we have bodies. We have hands, we have eyes, we have feet. But the existence of these body parts isn't what makes us alive. The mere possession of organs doesn't make you alive. The possession of fingers, the possession of a mouth, like mandible, jaw muscles, that doesn't make you alive. Hip bone doesn't make you alive. You can have all those things and be completely dead. But what makes you alive is that wind, that spirit, that animating life force that activates this body and causes it to do something. So in Genesis, when you go back to the Genesis idea, you find that the Most High breathed his spirit. Yah breathed his spirit into us in the beginning. And that spirit gave us life. That spirit operating inside of us is what gave us life. So now we don't just have hands. We don't just have feet. We don't just have eyes and a mouth, but now we have hands that can build for Yah, the Most High, the Creator. We have eyes that can see with his vision. We have a mouth that can speak his word, and feet that will walk on the path preferred by the Most High, with the spirit, with the influence, with the wisdom, the teachings, the higher consciousness of the Creator activating our bodies, guiding our steps. We're going to move in harmony with that Holy Spirit. That's our ideal state as a people. That's when we're at our strongest. That's an important thing to keep in mind, because the war in Genesis, the spiritual warfare began when we fell under the influence of a different spirit, a different thought process, a different ideological seed was planted in our minds, which would then cause us to change our behavior. And if you go into the book of Genesis chapter 3, what you would realize is, as a result of a conversation, what happens during a conversation? Words are expressed. What are words? They're ideas, right? And how do they travel? Through the wind. Words are ideas in motion from one brain to another. Words are ideas in motion. Thought is spirit, it's unseen. But how do you convey thoughts from one brain into another person's brain? One of the most effective ways to do it is with words. And when you use words to convey information, you're actually not just conveying information, you are imparting spirit. The only question is, what kind of spirit are you imparting? So when you speak, when you communicate, when you teach a class, when you instruct somebody, when you talk to your children, when you talk to a friend, which was actually happening psychologically, is you have an intention, and you tell your brain to cause the other person to understand your intention, whatever it is. You could say something like, can you make me a sandwich? You want the other person to make a sandwich. So you tell your brain that I want this person to make me a sandwich. Your brain is like, okay, I'm going to send a message to different parts of your body, which are going to work together to convey this idea. First of all, the part of your brain which processes the definition of words, because you have to select the right words to convey it correctly. That part has to work in conjunction with your stomach, with your lungs, because you have to pump oxygen, you have to pump, your respiratory system has to get involved so it can generate the wind required for the words to travel. Your jaw muscles have to be connected, your teeth, your tongue, all of these things work together to communicate words. So it seems simple to say like, oh, I had a conversation, but you actually got your whole physiology involved to kind of turn your body into a factory that can produce words and pour these words into somebody else's mind. That person had to hear the words, process the words, understand the words, and then tell their brain, I agree, I'm gonna go make the sandwich, And so if you were watching this whole scene play out and you didn't hear anything that was said, let's say the person says, go make me a sandwich, right? And the other person, I ain't gonna make you no sandwich. And then they start to fight and you can't hear what they're saying you could still see the spirit moving in that room by the way that they're interacting. You can see their body language. Even if you don't speak the language, you would hear it in their tone of their voice. So this person's body became a vehicle to convey a negative spirit. Or the other person took positive words and processed it in such a way where a negative result was had. And so all of this is happening in the invisible realm, but it has visible results. And that is the essence of spiritual warfare. In Genesis chapter 3, it was a conversation which caused a transformation. A conversation that caused a transformation from positive to negative, from life-giving to destructive, from regenerative to degenerative. All this took place through the power of words, which is why the Bible teaches us that death and life are in the power of the tongue.